ADHD is the most common neurodevelopment disorder among children in the U.S. KLTV's Christine Guevara reports the number of kids being diagnosed is on the rise.
Pediatrician Dr. James Davis with UT Health says ADHD is a disorder related to executive functions affecting all ages.
So that's things pertaining to time management, task triaging, working memory, impulse control, emotional regulation, things like that.
The most common signs can be hyperactivity, impulsivity, inattentiveness, and even anxiety. Health experts are seeing a rise in diagnosed numbers. A recent CDC report states in 2022, an additional 1 million children in the U.S. aged 3 to 17 were diagnosed with ADHD compared to 2016, bringing the number to 7.1 million. Furthermore, 1 in 9 kids have been diagnosed.
Which is not terribly surprising. And we're also seeing the gap closing in terms of girls becoming a little bit more equally diagnosed compared to boys, which is also matching some of the adult data, which is that by the time adults are being diagnosed, it's about 1 to 1, where previously it was about 4 to 1 boys to girls.
He says the increase is due to better awareness and better understanding of what it looks like behind the scenes, which leads to more screenings. He also says researchers are still studying whether COVID affected the increase.
If you as a parent or you as a first responder teacher have a concern, it's worth raising a question, because you never know if you're uncovering ADHD or you're uncovering something that has a lot deeper roots that may need a little bit more help.
Christine Guevara, KLTV 7 News.
Dr. Davis says medications have been found to be effective in managing symptoms. Additionally, behavioral strategies can be implemented at home to support individuals with ADHD.